Hello again. So here we are again with another interesting presentation from Andy Carvell about mobile app retention strategies and tactics in 15 minutes. So here you go. The stage is all yours, Andy.
Thanks, Pascal. I'm sharing my screen. I'm just going to switch to my slides. I apologize in advance to anyone watching that I can't figure out how to get rid of the ugly URL bar at the top. So please just pretend it's not there. Is about mobile app retention, and I'm going to present some strategies and tactics for improving and measuring and improving your app retention. So in other words, how many people are coming back and sticking with your app. And I'm going to try and cover that in 15 minutes. So it's going to be, I'm going to go pretty quickly through a bunch of material. But yeah, hopefully you'll learn something along the way. So who am I? My name is Andy Carvell. I'm the co-founder of a company called Phiture. I'll tell you about Phiture in a minute. My background is actually in developing mobile games. I've been in mobile for a bit over 20 years. I started making mobile games back in 1999 when I was fresh out of university, developing games for Nokia in-house at their R&D facility in the UK. Later on in my career, I joined Soundcloud, kind of when I made a break from the games industry. I made games for many years. I joined Soundcloud back in 2012, and stayed with them for about another 4.5 years, helping them to grow and to sort of transition from being a mobile-first a web-first company to a mobile-first company, and helping them to really grow adoption of their mobile apps, which is where I published something called the Mobile Growth Stack, which is what you see down there at the bottom, and which is a framework to help marketers and CEOs and growth professionals to understand the levers for growing a mobile app. As a really nice kind of segue from the last talk from the wonderful Jutta, actually on the subject of fuck-ups, I host an occasional podcast series. We just launched season 2. It's called Mobile Growth Nightmares. That's the thing up there on the top right. It's kind of a fun project that I run with Jessica Bichigo from Blinkist, where we have people from the mobile industry come on the show every episode and talk about their growth fuck-ups from the mobile space. So that's kind of the thread running through these two presentations. So I'm already 2 minutes in, so I'm going to speed up. Yeah, we're Phiture. We've won some awards. We work with companies like the ones you see here, generally sort of later stage B2C mobile apps. We're working with some of the top apps in the industry and helping them to stay on top and to grow their user base and make their users stick around more often. And I'm going to share with you some of the strategies and tactics for doing just that. So I'm going to dive right in. So when we talk about active users, first of all, you can think about active users and growth in general as a system a little bit like this. So you've got users coming in. Most people kind of think about marketing, they think about acquisition. So it's acquiring more users, more installs for the mobile app. Some of those users will activate successfully. That means that they will experience the core value of the app and find it useful enough that they remain active for some period of time. They become a monthly active user. Some of those users will churn and become dormant after some period of activity. Many of those users will churn right away. They'll just install the app, take a quick look at it, decide for whatever reason that it's not for them. They'll never come back. They go immediately to dormant. There's a whole kind of challenge in resurrecting dormant users to turn them either back into active users or into active users in the first place. And you need to sort of tackle those two specific challenges slightly differently. But this is basically the system, right? Like users are in one of these 3 states. They're either new, active, or dormant at any given point in time. So one of the challenges when we think about measurement is if you look at a graph like the one on the left here, looking at something like total users, tells you nothing really about growth. Not really. It looks like a very impressive graph. It's going up and to the right, so it's all good, right? Well, not really. If we look at the same graph broken out by life cycle stages, and we can see actually under the line that a whole bunch of users are churning every month and becoming dormant, we see that actually the situation is not healthy at all, and it's probably just fueled by throwing bundles of money onto the fire and burning it on user acquisition every month. If you stop doing that, stop burning that money, the app will soon be out of users. So a much healthier retention situation is what you see on the left here. This is on the right, sorry, where we see a much lower amount of churn, much smaller percentage of the acquired users in any given month becoming dormant, or the active users becoming dormant. And this is a more sustainable growth situation. Another way of looking at retention, and another classic way to sort of measure and look at retention is to look at a retention curve. This shows the blended retention of all of the cohorts who've joined, and it shows basically what's their average state for sticking around. We see time along the bottom there, so this could be days or weeks or months, depending on how you plot it. The curve's going to look more or less the same. If it's looking like the blue curve, then you have a decent level of product market fit. This is what a healthy retention curve looks like, because it's leveling off at a certain point in the process. If it's looking more like the one on the green line here, or might be more curvy, but if it's trending to 0, this is basically showing what we saw on the last slide here, this kind of middle section where we see a lot of churn. Basically it's showing that after a certain amount of time, users who joined on day 0 are no longer going to be sticking around in the app. So you want your retention curve to look something more like the blue line, and then the challenge for a marketer becomes how to get it to level off higher up this curve. So this is like the number of percentage of users who are sticking around after some period of churn. So there's a sort of a hardcore segment of users who are appreciating the app and sticking around for the long term. This is very healthy retention, by the way. If you can get mobile app retention anywhere near 50% on the long term, you're doing very well indeed. There's a lot of factors that influence retention. We like to, at Phiture, break retention curves down. So we saw just there like a blended retention curve, as we call it. Here we're breaking it out by acquisition source so that we can see which acquisition sources are bringing the most sticky users, the ones that stick around the longest. Often one of the biggest levers for improving retention is to change where you're acquiring your users from. It's definitely not the only lever. We'll come on to the others in a moment. Boom, here we are. This is the engagement and retention layer of the mobile growth stack. This is a framework which I published originally when I was at Soundcloud and continue to develop here at Phiture, and it's something that we use in all of our engagements. This layer particularly is focusing on the levers for improving engagement and retention. Engagement and retention are inextricably linked. If you don't have an engaging product, you can forget about doing things like lifecycle marketing or community engagement to try to retain users over the long term. If your product sucks, people won't be retained. You might be able to trick them into coming back a couple of times with a push notification or a special offer. You're not going to keep them around for the long term. So engagement first, retention second. And what is the difference? Well, engagement is what they do within the app. Are they coming back and actually doing something which gives them value and hopefully gives you as an app publisher also value? This is whatever they're doing in the app is the measure of their engagement. And of course, that can increase or decrease without them being churned user. They could still be active, but they could have different levels of engagement. Retention is, how often are they coming back, if at all? So that's typically measured in terms of, how many days in a month or how many weeks in a month. You can look at different time slices, but it should be ideally tied to the kind of natural expectation of like how often is your app solving the problem for the user. Some apps will be used a lot more naturally a lot more often than others, and so you have to kind of tune your tactics here, which I'm going to go through in a second, to that natural usage frequency as much as possible. You don't want to try and be pushing people to use your app daily if it's a travel booking app, for example. I mean, particularly not in coronavirus times, but even normally, like most people are not booking travel every day. And if you try to force people to love your app and use it every day, even if it's like for booking travel, it's just not reasonable to expect people to book a holiday every day, for example. So the key part of the biggest lever for improving engagement and retention is product. As I mentioned, if your product's not engaging, if it's not really like delivering the value and the good experience to the user, you can forget about doing the other stuff. But assuming that you are doing something right with the product, there's usually a lot of room to improve your retention by focusing on activation. If we go back, if we think about that curve that we looked at, the blue curve, even though it leveled out at a certain point, most of the users who were dropping off in the first couple of days. That's completely normal, and it's basically the same for every app. So there's a big opportunity to activate users more successfully by providing them a good onboarding experience. Here's a couple of examples. I think I've got a couple more later. I'm a big fan of lifecycle marketing and activity notifications. We use these a lot at Phiture. We help our clients to leverage these channels in order to bring people back and engage them more with particular features or content within the app. On the left here, you see an in-app message, mobile in-app message. I'll give some more examples of these later. In the middle, we have something called an app inbox, or sometimes called like a set of content cards, kind of a persistent space within the app where you can kind of like leave messages for users, promotions or education or really anything. And on the right, it's a push notification. You've probably all received plenty of those. I came up with a formula based on my experience at Soundcloud, building a real-time notification service system there, which was pumping out some hundreds of millions of push notifications per week. Having a lot of sort of trial and error, like measuring the effectiveness of these different notifications, I came up with this formula. I don't have really time to go into it in detail now, but it's essentially 3 components: reach, relevance, and frequency. If you can reach a large percentage of the user base with a highly relevant message and be able to send those messages at high frequency, and there's an inherent tension between the relevance and the frequency there. The higher the relevance, the higher the frequency that the user will tolerate typically, the more impact you're going to drive with that notification. You can read more about that at the link below. So I mentioned activation a little bit. There's a few different steps there in activation. We typically look at a funnel for this. So we'd map out all of the steps within the onboarding process and look at the ones that have the highest drop-off, the highest friction, and try to focus on optimizing those if you're looking at like improving your onboarding flow or your activation. I think Evernote is one of the best examples I've seen of like a really solid onboarding flow. So on the very first landing screen, you see that on the left, they're explaining the product proposition nicely with a nice kind of animated, kind of almost like a video. It's really explaining, what is this app? What does it do? What problem is it going to solve? Then, instead of just telling you about it, it makes you do the things, makes every new user create a note, try the camera, do all of the things which the app can do. It makes them do them at least once, gets them over that hurdle. That increases a lot of friction with the onboarding process. I'm sure a lot of people don't complete this, but those that do have a much better chance of forming a habit around using the app. Okay, I've got a quick example here from SoundCloud. Don't worry that you're not going to have time to read all of the text. This is the RRF framework in action. Basically, we prioritized a bunch of example campaigns for SoundCloud, different ideas. We came up with one around asking the user for to provide their favorite genre during the onboarding process so that we could personalize their welcome email. We did some iteration around that. My point here is that almost all of these ideas, they're decent enough ideas, but you need to iterate on them in order to really get to higher impact. This was all delivered through a system called Braze, by the way. We used in-app messages deployed through the Braze marketing automation platform in order to quickly iterate on these ideas, just as an FYI. So this was not during my time at SoundCloud. We're actually working with them as a client now. So this was more recently work that we did with Phiture. So again, just onto the topic of iteration, we iterate a lot on every idea. I think it's the real skill is not coming up with the ideas, but like knowing how far to iterate them and when to throw them away because they're just not working. Everything needs to be measured. So just example, we tested a lot of different copy, a lot of different variations, trying to improve the completion rate of this particular, what we would call a survey, such that we were able to collect the genre information and then create a nice, what you see on the right here, a nice new welcome email with a personalized playlist for every user, or rather for every genre. And that improved a whole bunch of stats within their system. Certainly it improved activation rate, improved overall engagement subsequently, and it also improved subscription revenue as well for them. I've got a couple more examples. I'm going to go super quick because I've got about 1 to 2 minutes left. Here's just another example of like a survey and how we use Braze, again, in this case, to to collect information from the user in real time, and then immediately we can start using that information to provide a more personalized experience. We can send them more personalized messaging based on the responses that they've given us. This is from Fishbrain, which is a social phishing app. Here's some examples from Headspace, another client of ours, just to give you some idea of like the different kind of multi-channel approach that you can take in order to boost some of your engagement and retention metrics. Some stats there on the right of like the kind of uplift that we were able to see through deploying a multi-channel messaging approach with Headspace. Just want to call out that rich push, this is what you see on the right here, push messages with graphics in, not always doing so well in our experience. Worth testing, but we haven't really seen great performance with them. SMS, on the other hand, super old technology, still works really well. I've got 2 more slides left, so I'm going to be finishing just about on time. Much better, rather than to try and reactivate users, to understand when they're about to churn and interact with them before they do so. There's a whole, like, it's a big topic all on its own. I'm not going to give a whole presentation on churn prediction. Just want to say prevention is better than cure. And finally, in order to actually implement any of this stuff, if you're working at a company that has a mobile app, you like some of these strategies and tactics and you want to employ them, yeah, we'd love to help you with that, first of all. Secondly, my big advice is that you have to kind of combat fear within your organization. If you come to your boss and say, hey, I want to run some experiments, I want to try this and this and this, Andy from Phiture said that this is going to work, you may well come across some resistance, some fear of changing things or fear of annoying users. You can combat that fear with data. Always use control groups, always measure what you're doing, be honest when you fuck something up, but also like shout about the wins as well. And you'll win people over, but it's an education process within the organization often. That's it. I'm 1 minute over. I apologize, but that's the end of my presentation. Contact details there. We'd love to get in touch and talk to you again. Talk to you more. And I'm also happy to take any questions if we have time.
Great. Thanks, Andy, for that presentation. I think we are almost in time. So I have the feeling you could talk like hours about this subject, but now you had to squeeze it into 15 minutes. But you did a really well job. There are 2 questions. Let's start with the first one. If you could give an example of an app that you think has really great retention, maybe an app which is not Reddit or so.
Sure, app with really great retention. So I'm going to give an example from a Berlin-based app. So I'm actually I'm based in Berlin, in Germany. So I'm going to give a shout out to an app called Captain Cook. It's with a bunch of K's. I'm not even sure if I can spell it, but you can Google it. It's a cooking app, and it has this thing called disappearing recipes, right? So you basically have to like log in each day to see the recipe, and if you log in to see the recipe of the day, you're able to save it to your kind of collection. But if you don't come back to during that day, then it disappears, and you can't save it, and you'll never see it again. So that's one particular tactic which they used, and they actually had like pretty high retention from the numbers that they shared with us. So it's just an example of a slightly sort of original approach. This kind of idea of like scarcity of information and sort of fear of missing out worked very well for them. So that's my example.
All right, great. Sounds like addictive cooking. Sounds like fun. So there's another question, pretty long one. I'll just read it from Chris. We have an app that is not solely a product, but part of a full service. So because of the nature of our product, we simply don't have many dropouts sort of by design. We still want to improve the engagement, of course. Also improving the speed and success of users are guided through the app's user journey. What do you think about measuring relevant behavior for such a case where the typical danger of dropouts is so low?
Yeah, I mean, if you've got like a companion app type thing, right? Let's say you're an airline app and somebody needs to use your app to book tickets, or you're maybe there's a piece of hardware and you're the official app for that hardware, like a Sonos device, for example. Yeah, there is a danger that you become a bit lazy in terms of like looking after the user experience, because the user doesn't have any option. So I think, first of all, great that you're asking. I think that already shows that you really care about your users and user experience. And then I'm not quite sure I understood exactly like what I'm being asked about measuring. I mean, I think even if your kind of your baseline is high for your sort of level of engagement, you can always still see if you can get an uplift from that through your experiments. But I would say in this situation as well, I mean, actually in every situation, but maybe particularly in these situations, I would also lean a lot on qualitative user feedback. Actually get loyal users and maybe disloyal users, people who've actually churned. If you can get them into the office or just on Slack or on a call, even better. Ask your users, what do they like about the app? What do they find frustrating? Have them use it in front of you or record a session and actually go through it. This qualitative feedback often tells you so much more than just looking at a bunch of analytics data. Even better when you pair it with the analytics data and really see what's going on from both of those lenses. But yeah, I think in this case, getting qualitative information is super important, because you might conclude that everybody has a good experience because nobody's churning.
I can totally agree with that statement. I mean, that also holds true for web analytics. I mean, sometimes it's more useful to actually ask users how they, for example, feel about a certain navigation on the page, rather than just collecting tons of data just by analyzing analytics data.
Absolutely.
All right. I see we don't have any more questions, and we are right on time. So thanks again, Andy, for presenting. It was really interesting. In case you want to contact him, here you see the contact information.